Today we're doing a crash course on the Si Impact console from Soundcraft. You learn basic functionality, how to get started mixing quickly. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the deeper features of this board because Soundcraft has several videos already created that would teach that better than I can. Today I'm using a Shure SM58 microphone, which is plugged into channel 1 back there, and you can see my voice showing up here on the meter bridge as well as here. And the first thing that the signal sees when it's plugged in back here is the gain. And so I have the gain set up somewhat low, probably lower than I would in a live mixing situation, but that's because I don't want to overload my camera, which I'm using my phone as a camera. But you can hear a little bit of what happens when we do increase that gain beyond what's reasonable. I'm sure nobody appreciated that, so you understand why I have the gain set low. But when you are setting gain, how do you know when it's low? The way I know, or what I use as a general guideline, I never want to go beyond the -6 number. -12 is even fine, but -6 is probably a good maximum, because that way you have a little bit of room before it actually reaches that red zone where it distorts. And so you set the gain with the gain knob here, and 48 volt phantom power is usable or necessary when you have a condenser microphone, certain ribbonite microphones, or an active direct box. You would need to engage that. We don't need it on the Shure SM58. Here is a polarity reverse button. Useful every great once in a while. If you want to do a search on that, see the applications where that might be useful, you can. I'm not going to dig too deeply into that. The high pass filter, which you're already hearing the benefit of. Let me show you what it sounds like when it's disengaged. So you're probably hearing some more popping P's, and the general girth of my voice is a little bigger. So that's set currently at about 200 hertz. I'm going to turn it down and re-engage. You probably heard no difference when I re-engaged. But as we raise it up, you hopefully heard some of those differences. Now, me personally, I'm flying blind. I'm not hearing what you're hearing. I'm just speaking into a microphone, which is connected to the board, which is connected to the phone. But I'm going to trust that what I'm saying is translating. So generally speaking, on a male voice, setting that high pass filter right about 200 hertz is helpful. Generally speaking, on a female voice, maybe closer to 300. But don't trust any of the numbers that I'm saying and take them as gospel of what you should always do. You should always experiment, listen, see if you hear the difference when you're twisting the knobs. By the way, high pass filter is a sound guy's way of saying low frequency cut. High pass, low cut. So below 200 hertz right now, or 180, and you'll see this over here. Below that frequency, we're having a cut. And you can see that visually, EQ, excuse me. You can visually see the low cut when I engage and disengage. You can see what's happening there. When I set it down lower or higher. So that's that. And you have to have it engaged if you want it to work. I'm temporarily going to skip the dynamics section. We'll come back to that. Go directly to EQ. And you can see the difference visually again between engaged and disengaged. I've already done some work on EQ, but I'm going to undo that work. And you'll see these 4 knobs here are all directly vertical at 12 o'clock. And you got the red LED lit up there to show, to affirm that they're all at 12 o'clock, which means they're neither adding nor subtracting anything to the sound source. And that's the way we like to start. And I'm going to now engage the EQ. And if your sound system is pretty well set up, it's got good speakers, perhaps you've had somebody come in and tune the system, it sounds really good, you've got a good board, good microphones, good musicians, you've got so much good going on that there's no knob that you can just twist that says more good. But let's say it's 90% good. You can find the 10% ugly and reduce it. So based on what I know of an SM58, I am relatively confident I can boost about 8 or 9 dB. And we'll start sweeping down here at 20 Hertz, sweep it on up. You can see what's happening here. Sweeping on up past 200, past 300, and 500. And somewhere in there, I'm going to take a wild guess and say it was probably close to that 400 range, is where it sounded the nastiest. So now I'm going to turn this back down to 0, neither adding nor subtracting any of that frequency I just found. Chances are you can still hear that nastiness that we found, the 10% ugly that we found. So here it is again. Listen to what that sounds like, and then listen to what it sounds like when I'm not affecting it. I'm going to take a wild guess and say you still hear that nastiness and that you would appreciate a cut on that general frequency. And now let's see, is that cut pleasing? And the cut is gone now. Do you prefer no cut or do you prefer a cut? Assuming that you're hearing what I think you're hearing, I'm going to show you one more thing with that boost. We can choose this is the boost or cut. This is the frequency we're boosting or cutting. This is the bandwidth of that frequency. Now for general shaping of the sound, we can go with a really wide, some people call this Q, on this board it's called Q, other boards might call it bandwidth, which affects frequencies on either side of 400, not just the narrow 400 frequency bandwidth. Or we can go really narrow, let's say you're searching for feedback. You're no longer just searching to find a frequency that's tonally unpleasant, but you actually have some feedback in your system and you know which microphone is creating it. You can boost, sweep to find that frequency, and cut with very little disturbance to the other frequencies on either side, which is generally a good thing unless you have a lot of feedback in that general region, which usually is not the case. Usually it's going to be a specific frequency here, specific frequency somewhere else. So you can use this both for general tone shaping as well as for eliminating feedback on a particular microphone at a particular frequency. On a vocal microphone, I generally like to add just a little bit of something, and you can see here we have that same bell curve going on, and we can make that wider or narrower. And just so you can kind of hear, I'm going to give this a little more boost, and generally speaking your S sounds are going to be between 8 and 12K. Temporarily I'm going to go back so you can see the frequency that I'm working with. See there, it's 6.3 kilohertz, 7, and I'm just going to do some S sounds and you listen. And so probably somewhere in the 8 to 12 kilohertz range is where the S's become most prominent. And it's going to be different for every mouth, every set of teeth. People make their S's just a little bit differently. But you saw what was going on there. And often I like to add just a little bit of shine. Notice I said a little bit. It's like a spice. A little bit goes a long way. And I'm going to broaden that up a bit and only add about 2 decibels there. And just again, I'm just trusting that that was slightly pleasant. You wouldn't really know until you heard it in the middle of a mix where you've got guitars, keyboards, other vocalists, drums, everything going on at the same time to know whether or not this high frequency boost is pleasant. If you turn this knob all the way to the left, we get rid of the bell curve and we get what we call a shelving EQ. This red light lit up. And as we move this frequency lower and we raise it up so you can see what's going on, you can see that shelving EQ is not only affecting the frequency that I'm setting, but everything above it. And that might be helpful in some situations. Myself, I tend to go for a little bit more surgical approach where I'm affecting just the frequencies that I choose to affect rather than a whole wide swath, although there are times when that wide swath is helpful in what's needed. Just because you have 12 knobs in this section doesn't mean you need to use them all. And I tend to go with the less is more approach, the if it's not broken don't fix it approach. You could use the boost and sweep to find the ugly with one more knob, and you might have some good results as you do so. However, this is often very effective for many vocal mics, especially the SM58. And I don't find a need to use this row or this row of knobs unless I need to use it. There's not a good reason to engage them. Don't engage them. Sometimes you might see, for example, somebody thinks, oh, this is just a bass drum we're working on. We might as well crank the bass, cut the highs, and they go with this radical approach to the kick drum, which didn't really probably make that kick drum sound good. It probably made it sound pretty nasty because it's extreme settings without rhyme or reason. Always have a reason for what you're doing. But I do encourage you, especially during rehearsals, not necessarily during a performance or a church service, experiment, listen, twist knobs and listen. That's the way you learn. I'm going to back up and go back to the gate. And again, earlier I said that this is very much a novice or maybe slightly into the mid-level of experience is the person I'm making this video for. So I'm only going to cover a couple knobs in this gate section for now, and that's the threshold, and the on button, and that's about it for today. So you can see this gate is closed when I stop talking. It means exactly what you think it might mean. It's closing the gate. It's closing the audio so that there's no audio passing through this channel as I'm speaking until I speak. And I can change that threshold. Now watch what happens when I turn the threshold up. You're going to start to hear my voice cutting. I have to talk quite loud when I've set the threshold that high. Now this can be helpful just for cleaning up general mud. For example, your vocal microphones. You might decide that you like that gate set on a really low setting, even when all the channels are on. And you might even set it a little higher so that somebody actually has to be speaking into the microphone to turn that microphone on. Where I find this especially helpful is anything that's using a direct box that might happen to have a buzz or a hum issue, like a bass guitar or a keyboard it's plugged into the soundboard through a direct box first. If you've already tried lifting the ground on that direct box and that hasn't helped your buzz or hum issue, you can gate it out. So you just turn this gate high enough that the buzz goes away and the bassist has to play his or her instrument before you can hear it. So I'm going to leave that engaged for now, and that's the end of our gate lesson. Compression. Again, I'm going to only cover 3 buttons here. The on button to turn the compressor on, and let's see if I can do this with 2 hands now. And so my hands are very roughly represent dynamic range that a vocalist might speak with or sing with, preach with. Their quietest point, their loudest point. And if you have a vocalist who speaks really softly and then they get very loud and you have to turn them up at their soft points, you got to turn them down at their loud points, the compressor can do a lot of that for you. So instead of letting them actually get this loud, we set the threshold here. Vocalist sings that loud, They're really kind of unaffected by the compressor. But as soon as they go beyond this threshold that I've set, it starts compressing at a rate or a ratio that I set here. So if I would generally say for vocalists a ratio somewhere between 2:1 and 4:1, which means anything over this threshold, if you go 4 decibels over on a 4:1 ratio, is squishing it down to 1. If you go 20 decibels over on it's a 20:1 ratio, it's squishing it down to 1. And so instead of the vocalist having this wide range that goes up and down, it hits that threshold and it almost acts like a spring, says, no, keep down. You don't get to be any louder. So we had the wide range, now we got the compressed range, but now we can move that whole thing up. The soft parts become louder, and the loud parts are just as loud as they were before, which is all controllable by your fader after the action of the compressor has happened. Super helpful for vocalists who have a wide dynamic range, but you can apply it to just about any instrument. Your drums, your bass guitar, your keys, your guitars, just about any instrument can benefit from some of that. Again, use it judiciously. I'm going to show you what happens when we engage that compressor. We start to raise the threshold. You're going to watch here. You can see that. So talking in a normal voice, turning up the compressor threshold to the point where, let's go here. Compress, 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 compress. Okay, I had it backwards because I can't get my head close enough to the board to see the numbers while I'm speaking into this microphone. But you can see, so you can see as I speak louder and as I turn the compression threshold lower, we start to see the compressor acting. And this red meter here is operating on the channel that I've selected. You can also see the compressor, you got a red meter here that's showing regardless of what I've selected. And so that is showing me how much reduction is happening as we're using the compressor. Now, if I don't use any compression at all, you can hear I just got louder, perhaps annoyingly so, especially if you're listening on a computer late at night and you didn't want anybody to wake up. Sorry about that. But, so you can see the reduction that's happening. So I like to set the threshold such that we're seeing probably no more than, especially on a really loud voice, 15 decibels of reduction is a lot. So I set the threshold and the ratio in tandem so that I can see no more than 15 decibels of reduction. If a person is singing just at a medium volume, you perhaps want to see no more than 1 or 5 decibels of reduction. You don't want to overcompress. One thing that can happen if you do overcompress is you end up compensating with the fader. So you're taking away those loud points, and you're even starting compressing over. You're overcompressing. You're compressing too much. You're taking away a lot of the not so loud parts and making them quieter. And so you're compensating by turning everything up after the compressor, and that can create feedback in a hurry. So you want to use this judiciously. Speaking at a medium volume, kind of like I am right now, that's probably a good setting. And then if somebody's getting really loud, 10 to 15 decibels of reduction, using the two in tandem. A 2:1 ratio or a 4:1 ratio is great for vocals and a lot of other instruments too. The delay knob means you can delay whatever channel you've selected. This may be helpful in some kind of advanced applications. For most of us, we don't use that very often, if ever. You'll also notice that I've got this microphone panned to the right, which is the only channel I'm sending to the camera right now. I could pan it to the left, and you heard nothing when I panned to the left. And that's basically, I'm sending this channel to the left and right mix bus, and that's my master fader for everything that I'm doing here. And very quickly, before I move on too far, I want to show you that we are right now on layer A of this board, which is the first 24 channels. We can move to layer B, which then gives you channels 25 through 32, as well as 4 stereo effects returns, which basically gives you a total of 40 channels to mix. And now we're going to talk a little bit about mixes. In most of your situations, a mix is going to mean a monitor mix. You can see this all lit up yellow as soon as I hit mix 1. I let go of that and it goes colorless. I go over to matrix. It's also colorless, but you also lost everything that's lit up here. We're not going to talk about matrices today, but I just mentioned that to say that color means you're on one of these mixes. No color with these on means you're on your house mix. It's important to know where you're at on the board at all times. You're now hearing this video, the audio, through mix bus 1, which is yellow, which indicates it's a pre-fade monitor mix, which means this monitor mix is taking its signal before it goes to the house signal. And I'll show you what that means in a minute, but it means it's functioning independently. Right now, I'm on, I'm somewhere in between, I'm on again, and if I go back to my house mix, I can move this up or down. It doesn't change a thing. You're hearing exactly what I had already set on mix 1. Let's go back to mix 1. You see it's lit up yellow. You see over here is also lit up yellow. That's the master for that particular mix. And the first 8, 9, 10, first 10 mixes are yellow. We get to mix 11 and it turned green. What does that mean? It means you're now on a post-fade monitor mix. I'm going to switch that cable. So we are now on a post-fade monitor mix. What does that mean? Well, again, now I'm back. Now I'm all the way back. However, when I go back to my house mix, this is affecting my monitor send. My monitor send is a post-fade send, which is after my house fader. I'm going to turn down my house. There we go. Now I'm back. So a post-fade mix is taking its signal after the fader that controls this for the house. You don't want that, generally speaking, for your monitor mixes. But it's very helpful, and I would say even necessary. It's the way you want to do things for your effects mixes, which are a different color yet. They're blue, and we'll get into that in a little bit. I'm trying to think of a situation. Okay, so where these post-fade mixes are effective is perhaps if you had a record feed that you want to send. You want to record sermons, you want to record concerts, you want to record whatever. You might take a post-fade mix. That way, anything you're doing to the house mix is affecting what you're doing to the record mix. And you might start out with everything on this post-fade mix. Take every fader and set it at 0, just to start, just to begin. And then if somebody has a pair of headphones on and they're going to listen to that mix only, I'm not seeing where you can PFL this mix. PFL again is pre-fade listen, which on this board is marked solo. So on certain other boards, this button would be called a PFL, pre-fade listen. You're going to listen to this channel. And you can solo lots of channels, which means it's no longer a solo. And when you're soloing, let's back up. When nothing is soloed, watch that meter. That meter over there is showing me the same thing that my main output meter is showing me. Only the right side is showing up because we're going to the left-right mix, but we're panned to the right. And so that's what it's showing. But if I hit solo, well, now both those meters are going, because that is now showing me anything that's soloed, which nothing else is plugged in right now. So this is the only channel that it's going to show up on the solo. And the other thing that happens when you hit the solo button is there is a headphone jack right under here. When you hit the solo button, anything that's soloed is going to show up in your headphone jack. That is super helpful, especially let's say you're mixing a band and there are 3 female vocalists and 2 male vocalists and one of them's off key and you can't tell which is which. Well, you can put your headphones on, or one ear, like I often do. Stick one ear of the headphone on your ear and go through and listen until you find the vocalists that you need to hear better and turn them up or down depending on what the case may be. You can use it a little bit to aid you in making better EQ decisions, but generally your best EQ decisions are made listening to the speakers that everybody else is listening to. So you got a whole bunch of stuff soloed, and you can wipe it all out with one button. Over here, we're going to program some mute groups. We selected the mute group button, mute group 1. I'm on my home layer for mixing, and I select all the channels I might want to have in a mute group. You could set these up any way you please. Perhaps you want to put all the drums on one mute group. Maybe bass and guitars all on another, keys, vocals, however you want to set it up. So I've selected these channels to be on this mute group. I get out of program mode. I selected mute group 1 and I was muted. Did exactly what it was supposed to do. So here you see me again. I'm going to talk. So all those channels get muted with a flick of one button. One mute group that I always like to set up is have one mute group for everything but the money channel, however you want to define that. In the context of a church service, perhaps it's everybody but the pastor. And so I could go set up a mute group with all the channels. In this case, I'm going to be the money channel. Get out of program mode. And now I've muted everybody but me and that guy, whoever he is. And that's especially helpful. So say you're in a church service, you've come to the end of the time of worship, transitioning to the sermon time. With one button, you've moved on to that next portion. Or perhaps you want to have, as part of that mute group, the pastor and keyboard and the vocalist on that. So that if you should become forgetful, not that it has ever happened to me, but you've engaged that mute group, the pastor's preaching away, and we come to the end of the service and you've still got music. You haven't muted those two. Depending on your comfort level of leaving 2 channels live for that entire period of time, that's another way you could use it. But you've got 8 of them at your disposal. So you can set them up however you would like. VCA. Now, VCA in days of old stood for Voltage Controlled Amplifier. It was a way of making a subgroup. And so if you assigned all your drums to that subgroup with one fader, you could pull all the drums down, push them all up. Modern times, a lot of console companies have gotten to calling a VCA a DCA, which is a digitally controlled amplifier. Soundcraft sticking with the old terminology, and so that's what that is. And we set up those groups in the same way the mute groups. You select VCA, you select number 1, you choose your drums or whatever you're going to be sending to that VCA. You get out of program mode. If you want to go back and see what you've programmed, just hit it again. You can see what's selected, what's assigned to that VCA. And then you go to fader layer, D. And you can see your matrices and your VCAs. So now anything that you've assigned to VCA 1, you can turn it up or down. So whether you want to put drums here, guitars here, keys here, and so forth, you can do all of that. Earlier I said that I didn't know how you could PFL our monitor mixes, but it's actually very simple. You can't be in program mode and switch between monitors and house. You just can't, and that's fine. You got to get out of your program mode, and now you can switch between your monitor mix and your house mix. And when you're in a monitor mix, remember we said earlier, this is your master fader for that mix, and you can go to layer B. Channels 25 to 32 are also all on mix 1. And then if you go to layer, another snag. What am I seeing? Let's get out of monitor mix and let's go to layer D, where you saw your VCAs, where you see your matrix masters, where you see your monitor masters. So all these mixes, mix 1 through 14, show up 1 through 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Remember, this color is pre-fade, this color is post-fade. And then your effects returns as well. These are your masters for your, actually these are your effects sends. And you can select, you could select that, you can apply EQ to the master fader of that, any mix that you've chosen, mix 1 or 4. You can add compressors, no gate. You can add a high pass filter, all of that to your master sends on all of these sends. And you can solo. So I think this would be especially helpful with if your musicians are on in-ear monitoring system, whether that be wired or wireless. You can solo and you can hear exactly what's going on in their mix. Sometimes it's always best to ask them, do you need any more of anything? Do you need any less of anything? But if you can see they're struggling and maybe they're giving you hand motions that you're not able to interpret, you could probably just give it a listen. Listen to mix 1, listen to mix 6, and see if you can figure out what they need more or less of. Chances are they need more of themselves. You can see where this output is patched. So it's patched output 15. Actually, left and right are probably patched both 15 and 16. And you can see that there. Left is 15, right is 16. Your outputs back here is what that's referring to. So this fader is being patched outputs 15 and 16 back here. If you want to get out of the output, just select a input. Now it shows me the inputs. And you can do the same thing here. Select channel 1 is assigned to channel 1. You can see that here. I can deselect, I can reselect, I can change the name, which I've already done on this channel previously. You can see most of these channels are labeled 1 through 24, or you can label them for the instruments that are plugged in. In this case, I labeled this kick because oftentimes you'll start with the kick drum, then snare, then different people might do it different ways, but snare top, snare bottom, tom 1, tom 2, tom 3, overhead left, overhead right, all that to say you can label these how you want to. Finally, I want to show you how to back up a show. And we simply click show, save as, you can name the show, apply, and then choose between MMC, which is the internal memory on the console, and USB, which is the stick. You could back up to the MMC as often as you like. Perhaps every day that you run the console wouldn't be a bad idea. Backing up to USB, perhaps once a month, depending on how critical a lot of your information is. It's nice to have something stored here that you can use to go back to if the board should ever happen to crash, or if you should ever happen to update the firmware and have to start from square one, you want to have a place to come back to. Also, these should be able to be used with other Soundcraft consoles, all the SI series, SI Compact, SI Performer, and the SI Expression. You should be able to use certain functionality between those consoles. So you choose where you're going to save it, push the button in, push OK. We're going to overwrite the old one, yes. And other ideas, you can save a Christmas show, an Easter production, many different possibilities how you could name things and save them both on the board and on the stick. Also, I want to show you the graphic equalizer. This can be applied to the mains, or it could be applied to one of your monitor mixes. And when it says graphic EQ low, it's referring to low frequencies, which are listed on the upper row here. So starting with 31 Hertz up to 630 Hertz. And so if I do a little boost, we get the beginnings of a smiley face looking EQ, if that's what you're into. And then we go to the graphic EQ high, and we can complete the smiley face. Well, maybe that's a grimace, I don't know. And so on the highs, we're looking at the higher frequencies, which is the lower row up here, 800 Hertz through 16 kilohertz. And this is useful for that sound person who feels like the sound system simply hasn't been tuned adequately, or perhaps you just want to, I guess the same would be true if you're doing it to your monitor mixes. You don't feel like the monitors have been tuned adequately. You can apply that EQ here. Whether that opinion of the system needing this EQ, whether that opinion is correct or incorrect, valid, invalid, whatever, I haven't heard your system, so I'll reserve judgment on that. But this tool is available, and the nice thing is, whether that person who made that decision is right or wrong, it's really easy to flatten it out, because you pull this down, you can feel the center detent. When it's in this mode, you feel the center detent, which takes the EQ back to zero, neither adding nor subtracting these frequencies that we're choosing. I hope this video has been helpful. You can leave some comments below. Thanks for watching.